Hello everyone, welcome to Daily English Pro, your place to improve English every single day. Stay focused, listen carefully, and try to repeat after what you hear. Let's get started.
Here's something that might surprise you. You've been studying English for years. You've passed your exams, you've read the books, you've watched American shows with the subtitles off, and you feel pretty confident. Then one day, you sit down to watch a BBC News broadcast, or maybe BBC documentary, and suddenly it's like someone changed the channel to a completely different language. The accent is crisp, the vocabulary is precise, the sentences are structured in a way that sounds almost too perfect, and yet, somehow, you're missing 30% of what's being said. Maybe more. And here's the painful part. It's not because your English is bad. It's because nobody ever taught you how to listen to British broadcast English specifically. Nobody told you about the rhythm, the restraint, the cultural codes embedded in every sentence. That ends today. By the time you finish this episode, you will understand the BBC on a whole new level, not just the words, but the world behind them. Welcome back to Learn English Lab, the podcast where we go deeper than textbooks and further than classrooms.
I'm so glad you're here today because we're diving into one of the most important and most underrated tools for advanced English listening practice, the BBC.
Yeah, and that feeling of just sudden, almost dizzying confusion you just described, we hear about that literally all the time.
Right, it's so common.
It is, and I really want to validate that right away for anyone listening. Our entire mission for this deep dive is to completely decode British broadcast English, which we'll probably just call BBE today to keep things simple.
Yeah, BBE sounds a lot better than saying the whole thing every time.
Exactly. So we want to take you on this journey from, merely translating individual words in your head, which is just exhausting, to actually comprehending the entire, cultural and acoustic matrix of the BBC.
Because it really is a completely different matrix, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a transition from passive hearing to active, enlightened listening. Because as we're going to explore today, there is a profound difference between knowing the dictionary definition of a word, right, and understanding the actual real-world weight it carries when a British broadcaster uses it on air.
Yeah, and I really want to speak directly to you, the listener, right now before we, get deep into the weeds of this. Because if you're learning English for your career or travel or just to expand your mind, you might be sitting there thinking, well, I'm focusing on American English or maybe just global business English, so why do I need to spend time analyzing the BBC?
Which is a totally fair question.
Right, but you really need to think of BBE as a master key. Across the globe, it is widely considered the absolute gold standard of spoken English. If you can unlock the nuances, the speed, and the subtlety of, say, a BBC interview or a high-level documentary, you are essentially supercharging your listening skills for literally any English conversation anywhere in the world.
Without a doubt. I mean, think of it like a professional athlete who trains with heavy weights or trains at a high altitude.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, because if your brain is trained to process the layered subtext and the really dense, sophisticated vocabulary and just the distinct pacing of BBE, then a standard corporate meeting in New York or Sydney or Toronto, it's just going to feel incredibly straightforward by comparison.
Taking the ankle weights off.
Exactly. Normal movement suddenly feels effortless. But to get to that point of effortless comprehension, before we can even begin to appreciate the beautiful, subtle culture of this communication style, we have to physically look at the sounds themselves.
Right, the acoustics.
Yeah, we have to essentially retrain your ear to decode the acoustic blueprint that's currently tripping you up.
So we have to build the foundation before we look at the architecture. I like that. Let's start by defining what we're actually talking about when we say BBE, because I think a really common trap is assuming the UK just has one generic, British accent, which, that couldn't be further from the truth.
Far from it. The UK is a relatively small geographic area if you compare it to the US or Canada, but it contains a staggering, almost unbelievable diversity of regional accents.
Yeah, it's wild how much it changes from town to town.
It really is. You have Scouse in Liverpool, Geordie in Newcastle, Brummie in Birmingham, Cockney in East London, plus all the incredible musical varieties of Scottish, Welsh, and Northern Irish English. And each of these has its own brilliant cadence, its own slang, its own vowel structures.
Right. But BBE is none of those things.
No, it's not.
So it's not regional. What actually is it? Like, where does it come from?
So historically, it evolved from something called received pronunciation, or RP. If we go way back to the early 20th century, RP was essentially the accent of the aristocracy.
Oh, like the elite boarding school.
Exactly, yeah. Oxford, Cambridge, the upper classes. When the BBC first started broadcasting in the 1920s, they adopted RP as their standard. And the underlying philosophy there was that it was the most neutral and widely understood form of English across the entire nation.
Free from any regional bias.
Right, that was the idea anyway.
But hold on, if I go on YouTube right now and listen to a BBC radio broadcast from like the 1920s or 30s, they don't sound like modern presenters at all.
Oh, they sound completely different.
Yeah, they sound incredibly stiff, almost theatrical, like they're performing in an old stage play with a really tight jaw.
They absolutely do. And what's fascinating here is that BBE hasn't remained frozen in amber. It has quietly, consistently evolved over the last century.
Okay, so it changed with the times.
Yeah, linguists today often refer to the modern iteration as contemporary RP, or sometimes they say it borrows heavily from estuary English, which is just a bit more relaxed.
Estuary English, right.
So those ultra-posh, incredibly stiff, clipped sounds of those old announcers have softened a lot. Today's broadcasters still sound polished. And they sound authoritative, yes, but they also sound warm. They sound human. They sound accessible.
Which is fantastic news for you listening right now. It means your goal isn't to try and understand some rigid, archaic language from a century ago, but rather a living, breathing, refined version of modern English.
Exactly.
But even with that softening, there are still massive hurdles, especially if your ear has been primarily tuned to American English through movies or pop culture. So let's break down these physical sound system challenges. Let's start with the first major hurdle, which I think linguists call the bath trap split.
Yes, the bath trap split. And this is perhaps the most immediate acoustic shock for a learner.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So in general American English, words like bath, laugh, path, dance, and can't are almost all pronounced with the short, flat ass sound. It's the exact same vowel you hear in the word cat or trap. Your mouth spreads wide and the tongue is relatively flat.
Right, like bath, trap, cat.
Exactly. But in BBE, these specific words use a long, rounded, open ah sound. The back of your tongue drops and your mouth opens vertically.
Oh, like when the doctor tells you to open your mouth and say ah to check your throat.
Spot on. So bath becomes bath.
Bath.
Yeah. And can't becomes can't. Last becomes last. Dance becomes dance. To give you a super practical example, if an American says, I can't take this path, a British broadcaster will say, I can't take this path.
And here's where the cognitive load just hits the learner like a brick.
Oh, totally.
Because for a split second, your brain, especially if it's not trained for this, hears a word like can't and immediately tries to search its mental database for a brand new vocabulary word.
Right. You think, what on earth is a can't?
You completely miss. It's just the everyday word can't.
Yeah.
Just pronounced with a deeper vowel.
And that microsecond of hesitation is all it takes. Because when you're listening to a fast-paced, high-level news segment, a 1-second delay to process a vowel means you just missed the next 3 words.
It's a domino effect.
Exactly. It's this compounding confusion that causes learners to feel like they're missing 30% of the broadcast. Now, compounding that vowel shift is the second major challenge, non-rhoticity.
Oh, I know this one. This is the famous dropped R.
Correct. In American English, the R sound is rhotic, meaning it's usually pronounced strongly wherever it appears in a word, especially at the end.
Right, like car.
Yeah, but BBE is non-rhotic. This means the R at the end of a syllable or word is mostly silent, and it's often replaced by just a slight elongation of the vowel that comes right before it.
So the word car doesn't have that hard, curled tongue American R. It just sounds like ka.
Yeah, ka. And water sounds like watu.
Waku.
Mother becomes muth. So think about a sentence like, the car is parked near the water. If a BBE broadcaster says this, you're hearing a sentence completely devoid of those hard R sounds at the ends of the words. It creates this smoother, rolling acoustic texture.
Right, but for the untrained ear, the absence of those hard consonants can make the ends of words feel kind of blurry, right? Like causing them to blend together in unexpected ways.
It absolutely does.
And that blending brings us to something that I think genuinely shocks a lot of learners. Because we tend to think of the BBC as the absolute pinnacle of crisp, perfect, almost mathematical enunciation. But then we encounter the third challenge, which is glottalization, the dropped T.
Oh man, this one truly surprises people who assume BBE is just entirely formal all the time.
Right.
Because the reality is that even highly polished, highly educated BBE speakers use glottal stops in their natural, everyday broadcast speech.
So what exactly is a glottal stop, physically?
Well, a glottal stop is a physical action where you replace the to sound in the middle or end of a word with a brief, sharp closure of your vocal cords.
So instead of a clean, sharp forward in the mouth butter, you get burr.
Yes, burr, better becomes bear. Bottle becomes burr.
Burl. That's so different from the American bedole.
Indeed. Or consider a very common phrase like, what are you doing? In natural BBE flow, that's T in what is totally swallowed, and it becomes, what are you doing?
I always like to think of it as a vocal speed bump, like your throat literally stops the airflow for a fraction of a millisecond. You aren't making a sound, you're actually making a tiny, deliberate silence.
That's a brilliant way to describe it.
But I think it is absolutely crucial to point out to the listener right now, this isn't sloppy speech. It's not a mistake or a sign of laziness.
Yeah, not at all. It is a completely intricate, natural, and really necessary part of modern British rhythm. If a broadcaster articulated every single T in a rapid conversational segment, they would sound robotic, alien, and frankly, quite exhausting to listen to.
Like a machine reading text.
Exactly. The glottal stop actually aids the fluid musicality of the sentence. It lets the speaker maintain their momentum without constantly tripping over these hard consonants.
And maintaining that momentum is exactly what the fourth challenge is all about, which is weak forms and elision. This is basically the mechanics of how words physically crash into each other and mash together.
Yeah, let's look at how this happens in connected speech. So, short grammatical function words, words that don't carry the main meaning of the sentence, like prepositions or auxiliary verbs, they get reduced to their weak forms. They become quieter, faster, and shorter.
So the word and just becomes an N sound.
Right, to becomes tuh. But the absolute most dangerous one for learners, the one that causes endless confusion on tests and in real life, is the word have, when it's used as an auxiliary verb.
Oh yes, the notorious should-of mistake.
Yeah.
Let's unpack this for you, the listener, because if you read internet forums or social media, you see this error all the time, even from native speakers.
It's everywhere.
When a British speaker says should have, they reduce the word have so much that it loses the H and the A. It just becomes a tiny, barely there A sound attached directly to the end of the first word.
So should have sounds identical to should have. Could have sounds like could have. Would have becomes would have.
And to an untrained ear, that weak E sounds acoustically identical to the preposition of.
Yes, which leads to incredible confusion. A learner hears, I could have gone, their brain processes I could have gone, and then their internal grammar checker throws a massive error because could have makes absolutely no grammatical sense.
It's literally an auditory illusion. The boundary between the two words is completely blurred out of existence, which is the essence of elision, right? Words just melting into one another.
Exactly.
Like a phrase like, what is it? Morphs into a single flowing, multi-syllable word.
What is it? Undeniably. And this is the core mindset shift the learner must make here. If you're listening to a BBC News program and your brain is desperately trying to find the clean white spaces between words, the way you see spaces between words on a printed page, you will become exhausted within minutes.
Because spoken English doesn't have spaces.
Right. You're listening to a continuous river of sound. You have to learn to navigate the currents and the overall shape of the sentence, rather than looking for individual, isolated drops of water.
That river of sound metaphor is perfect. And the way we navigate those currents, the way we know what's actually important in that continuous stream, is by listening to the rhythm. This is the fifth challenge, set and stress. Because BBE has a highly distinct musicality.
Oh, very much so.
Broadcasters place deliberate, heavy weight on specific words to guide your understanding of the story.
Yeah, let's look at a practical example of how this alters meaning. Imagine a BBC News reader delivering this line regarding a political scandal, okay? The Prime Minister has refused to comment. If the newsreader places the heavy stress on the word refused, saying, the Prime Minister has refused to comment, what is the subtext they're transmitting to the audience there?
Well, they're signaling that the refusal itself is the shock. Like the stories about his silence, the defiance of not speaking when everyone expected him to.
Correct. But what if they shifted that vocal weight? What if they said, the Prime Minister has refused to comment?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that changes the whole landscape. Then it implies we were expecting someone else to refuse, maybe a lower level minister or a press spokesperson. But the fact that the leader of the country himself refused, That's the real headline.
Okay.
The entire meaning of the sentence changes entirely just based on where the broadcaster decides to lean their vocal weight.
Oh, it's all in the stress.
But wait, let me push back on this a bit. I'll play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
If the BBC is considered the global gold standard for clarity, precision, and high-level communication, why are they swallowing their T's, mashing words together like what is it, dropping their R's, and relying on vocal weight to imply meaning? I mean, isn't true clarity about articulating every single letter cleanly and clearly?
That is a very common and honestly very understandable misconception, especially when we learn languages from textbooks where everything is perfectly separated. But true fluency and natural real-world clarity do not equal robotic enunciation.
Okay, so it's a different kind of clarity.
Exactly. Connected speech prioritizes rhythm, flow, and emphasis over the mechanical pronunciation of individual letters. You see, the English language is stress-timed,
Stress-timed, right?
which means the time it takes to say a sentence depends on the number of stressed syllables, not the total number of syllables. BBE speakers swallow certain sounds. They use those weak forms and glottal stops specifically so that they can land with absolute, undeniable precision and power on the words that actually carry the meaning, like refused or Prime Minister.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's a highly efficient, highly sophisticated way to transmit complex information rapidly. By shrinking the unimportant words, they create contrast that highlights the important ones.
That makes total sense. They're sacrificing the individual letters to save the overall rhythm of the sentence.
Yes.
So, okay, we've established the acoustic foundation. You, the listener, now know what to physically listen for.
Yes.
You're anticipating the ah sounds instead of the flat A. You're expecting the dropped R's. You're listening for those vocal speed bumps. You're letting the river of sound wash over you without searching for spaces, and you're hunting for the musical stress.
That's the toolkit right there.
But once you can hear those sounds accurately,
Yep.
we have to look at the actual building blocks they're using. If the sounds are the foundation, the words are the architecture. Let's move into the vocabulary universe of BBE.
And what a rich universe it is. The vocabulary used across the BBC, whether it's radio, television, or digital, is incredibly robust. They operate on a fundamental assumption. They do not talk down to their audience.
Which is so refreshing.
It is. They assume you, the listener, have a strong, capable intellect, and they use language that respects that intelligence.
And one of the most fascinating aspects of this vocabulary architecture is something the British are absolute world champions at. It's the linguistic practice of hedging.
Hedging. Yes, hedging is the fine art of softening your language. It's a way to make statements sound less absolute, less aggressive, and significantly more refined. It involves using modifying words like rather, somewhat, fairly, quite seemingly, arguably.
I love the concept of hedging. It's like wrapping your strongest opinions in velvet.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Like, if I'm an American and I think a new corporate strategy is going to fail, my instinct is to be direct. Maybe a bit like sandpaper. I'll just say, this plan is a failure. It causes friction, but it gets the point across. But a BBE speaker won't do that, will they?
No, they would never be that blunt in a formal setting.
Right. They will wrap it in velvet and say, the plan is arguably somewhat flawed. It achieves the same outcome, but completely removes the aggressive friction.
Exactly.
And speaking of friction, we need to pause and do a deep dive right now on one specific hedging word, because I genuinely think it traps more advanced learners than almost any other word in the English language.
I know exactly which word you're going to say.
The word quite.
Quite is a fascinating, incredibly dangerous cultural trap.
Let me paint a scenario for you. Imagine you're working in a multinational company. You've just spent 3 weeks building a massive presentation. You deliver it to your American colleague. They look at it, smile, and say, wow, this is quite good. In American English, how does that translate?
That is a high compliment.
Huge compliment, means very good, exceptional even. You walk away feeling like an absolute genius.
And this is the trap. If you deliver that exact same presentation to a British colleague, or if a BBC reviewer uses that phrase about a new film and they say, yes, it's quite good, the meaning is drastically, painfully different.
Brutally different.
Yes. In BBE, when the word quite is placed in front of what we call a gradable adjective, words that represent a scale like good, nice, interesting, or clever, it acts as a downgrader. It does not mean very, it means merely satisfactory. It means acceptable, but nothing special.
Wow.
It is the verbal equivalent of a non-committal shrug.
It downgrades the compliment. So in this scenario, you walk out of the room thinking you absolutely crushed the presentation and are in line for a promotion, while your British colleague walks back to their desk thinking, well, they have a mountain of work to do before that is presentable.
Exactly. The exact same two words, totally opposite meanings based on the cultural code.
That is wild.
And that is the danger of assuming direct translation equals comprehension. Now, the only exception to this rule, just to make it slightly more complex for everyone, is when a BBE speaker uses quite before an absolute adjective.
An absolute adjective. Give me an example.
These are words that don't have a scale, like impossible, certain, or finished. If a British broadcaster says that is quite impossible, they do not mean it is mildly impossible. They mean it is completely, unequivocally impossible.
Whoa, so it acts as an amplifier there.
Exactly. But with standard descriptive words, quite is almost always a polite dampener.
So understanding hedging is crucial for tone.
Yeah.
But let's look at how they construct the flow of their arguments. BBE heavily relies on formal connectors and abstract nouns to build their sentences.
This structural choice is a large part of what elevates BBC speech to that advanced C1 or C2 level of fluency. In everyday casual speech, we tend to string our thoughts together with basic conjunctions like and, but, or so.
Sure, very simple links.
Right. But BBC journalism utilizes connectors that provide a highly formal, rigorous, logical flow. You will constantly hear words like nevertheless, furthermore, conversely, hitherto.
Let's look at hitherto, because you almost never hear someone use hitherto on American cable news or in casual conversation.
Rarely, if ever.
It means until now, right? So instead of saying the documents were secret until now, a BBE presenter will say the documents were hitherto confidential. It just sounds so authoritative.
It really does. And alongside those formal connectors, you have the heavy use of nominalizations.
Nominalizations. Break that down for us.
A nominalization is a structural tool where a verb, an action word, is transformed into an abstract noun. For example, instead of using a simple subject-verb construction and saying, the government decided to act, a broadcaster will nominalize the verb decide and say, the government's decision to take action.
Ah, I see. It shifts the focus. It gives the sentence physical weight. It feels more textured, more official, and much more objective.
Exactly.
Now, to truly appreciate how these structural tools and this high-level vocabulary come together, let's look at how they deploy C1 and C2 level words in action. Because it's amazing to hear.
Oh, a masterclass.
Instead of just listing these out, let's imagine a hypothetical BBC News broadcast about a major political crisis, say. A scandal involving an incumbent politician whose policies are failing. We're going to use a handful of iconic BBE words that you will hear constantly and analyze how they do the heavy lifting in a sentence. Let's start with the word incumbent.
Incumbent is a perfect starting point. It can be a noun referring to the current holder of a political office, like the incumbent prime minister. But in BBE, you frequently hear it utilized as an adjective meaning necessary as a duty or responsibility.
Oh, right, like a moral obligation.
Yes. So in our hypothetical scandal, a newsreader might say, it is incumbent upon the prime minister to address these allegations. It carries a much heavier, almost moral weight than simply saying the prime minister has to address this. It implies a solemn duty to the public.
That's powerful. Okay, now let's say the public is incredibly angry about this scandal. The anger isn't just a localized protest, it's everywhere. A BBE reporter wouldn't just say, people are angry.
No, they would reach for something far more descriptive. They would use the word pervasive. They might report, there is a pervasive sense of distrust sweeping through the electorate.
Pervasive.
Yes. Pervasive means spreading widely throughout an area or a group of people, often in a very subtle, inescapable way. It's not just a loud minority, it's an attitude that has soaked into the walls of the country.
Like humidity, it's just everywhere.
Precisely.
And because of that pervasive distrust, the situation becomes incredibly tense. But again, BBE won't usually settle for a basic word like tense or difficult. They will reach for the word fraught.
Fraught. The Prime Minister's subsequent meeting with his cabinet was fraught with tension.
What does that actually convey?
Fraught means filled with something undesirable. It paints a vivid picture. You don't just have a hard meeting. A fraught meeting implies a heavy, oppressive, almost suffocating atmosphere in that room. You can almost feel the air getting thick.
You can just picture them sitting around the table, sweating. So the Prime Minister comes out of this fraught meeting and he has to give a press conference. He needs to calm everyone down and make the rumors vanish. The word here is dispel. His speech aimed to dispel rumors of an imminent resignation.
Yes, to dispel is to make a doubt, feeling, or belief disappear completely. It's a highly efficient word. You're essentially vanishing a concept into thin air with your rhetoric.
But let's say this speech doesn't work. Let's say the public wants more than just words. They want action. Here, a BBE panelist might use the word nuanced. They might argue the electorate is demanding a more nuanced understanding of the economic fallout.
Nuanced is such a key word on the BBC. It means having subtle distinctions and complex layers. It's a total rejection of black and white, yes or no answers. It's a word that demands deep, careful thought.
Right. And finally, let's say this whole crisis requires the opposition party to wake up and take charge. The word is galvanize. This scandal has served to galvanize the opposition. I just love the history of this word.
It has a brilliant etymology, doesn't it? It's linked to the 18th century scientist Luigi Galvani, who experimented with applying electricity to frog legs to make the muscles twitch.
Yeah, the frog legs.
Yes. So when you galvanize a community or a political party, you aren't just politely motivating them, you are sending a sudden electric shock through the system that physically forces immediate movement and action.
That is such a visceral image. It's amazing. So looking at words like fraught, pervasive, galvanize, incumbent, I have to ask on behalf of the listener, when a broadcaster strings all these incredibly dense, complex words together, are they just using big words to sound intellectual? Is this a kind of verbal posturing like, look how smart the BBC is, we all went to Oxford?
That is a very fair question to ask, and honestly, it's a common criticism from those who prefer plain English. But the answer is no, it's really not about posturing. It is entirely about precision.
Precision.
Yes. Basic adjectives often fail to capture complex, high-stakes realities. Saying the situation is bad tells the listener almost nothing. Why is it bad? How bad is it? Saying the situation is fraught with pervasive tension provides a sophisticated, highly accurate map of both the emotional and political landscape.
Because it's doing so much work at once.
Exactly. These words do heavy lifting. They concisely convey intricate dynamics that would otherwise take an entire paragraph of plain English to explain. It's an economy of words.
So it's about efficiency as much as it is about elegance. They use big words so they don't have to use 50 small words.
Right.
But the vocabulary alone, even these precise C1 and C2 words, doesn't fully explain the overall tone of the BBC. Because if they have all these incredibly precise, heavy-hitting words, why do they constantly use them to downplay emergencies?
Now we're getting to the heart of it.
Because the reason BBE uses such careful, hedged, circumspect language stems from a much deeper cultural philosophy. Which brings us to the absolute core of this deep dive, the art of British understatement.
If you take only one overarching concept away from this entire analysis today, it should be a deep understanding of British understatement. It is a communication style where dramatic, extreme, or emotionally intense situations are described in deliberately mild, restrained language.
Right.
It is the defining characteristic of the British public voice.
It's the famous stiff upper lip brought to life through grammar.
Yes, exactly. In traditional British public and professional life, extreme displays of raw emotion, whether that's overwhelming joy, devastating sadness, or explosive anger, are often viewed as undignified or inappropriate for the setting. Emotional restraint is not just a habit. It is considered a profound virtue, and this cultural value completely saturates the language of the BBC.
I really want to paint a picture with some examples of this restraint in action, because when you, as a learner, first realize this is happening, it's almost comical how extreme the disconnect is between the event and the language used to describe it.
Oh, it really is.
Okay, imagine a British man who has just survived a harrowing, terrifying car crash. His vehicle has flipped multiple times, shattered glasses everywhere. He climbs out of the wreckage, miraculously unscathed but covered in dirt. The paramedics rush over, panicked, and ask how he is. And he dusts himself off, takes a breath, and says, well, it's been a bit of a rough morning.
It is a masterpiece of understatement.
A bit of a rough morning.
Yes. He is completely acknowledging the reality of the crash, but he absolutely refuses to let the panic dictate his tone.
Or take a sports example. Imagine a highly competitive football manager whose team has just been utterly destroyed in a crucial match, losing 7-0. The fans are crying, the season might be ruined. The post-match interviewer thrusts a microphone in his face, looking for an emotional meltdown. The manager calmly adjusts his jacket and replies, "Well, clearly it was not our finest performance."
Exactly. He is acknowledging the absolute disaster without emotionally indulging in it for the cameras.
But those are everyday examples. The historical examples are where you truly see how deeply this runs in the culture. Think back to World War II.
Dunkirk.
Right. The Allied forces were trapped, pinned down, and had to execute a desperate, chaotic retreat from the beaches of Dunkirk. Hundreds of thousands of lives were hanging by a thread, the military equipment was abandoned, and the situation looked utterly hopeless. Prime Minister Winston Churchill stood up in the House of Commons and called the event a colossal military disaster.
Which is deeply fascinating to analyze linguistically.
Right, because it sounds normal to us.
Exactly. To a modern American ear, or to a global English learner, calling Dunkirk a colossal military disaster sounds very direct, very accurate, and highly descriptive. But in the context of the British Parliament in 1940, using such stark, unvarnished, apocalyptic language was shockingly blunt.
It broke the rules.
It completely broke the unspoken rules of understatement. By refusing to soften the language, Churchill proved to the nation just how unimaginably desperate the situation truly was. The lack of understatement was the alarm bell.
It gives me chills. The fact that not downplaying something was the most shocking thing he could do. Let's bring this into the modern BBC context. I want to look at a scenario that highlights this beautifully. Imagine a BBC documentary presenter is interviewing an Antarctic researcher.
Okay, I can picture this.
This researcher has spent 14 consecutive months in total, unforgiving isolation. They have endured freezing, lethal temperatures, months of perpetual darkness, likely battling severe depression and losing their mind a little bit from the sheer loneliness. The presenter asks, "How was the experience?" And the researcher says, "It was challenging at times. The isolation can be a bit much. I won't pretend it was always easy."
Let's decode that response layer by layer, because this is exactly what learners hear on the BBC and just misinterpret.
Please do.
When an American hears challenging, they might think of a tough final exam or a hard workout. But when a British person in a formal setting describes a 14-month survival ordeal as challenging, they often mean it was a waking, absolute nightmare.
Right.
When they say the mind-bending isolation can be a bit much, they mean it was psychologically overwhelming to the point of breaking their spirit. Not always easy is the ultimate British understatement for an experience that was brutally, excruciatingly difficult to survive.
I love to explain this to learners by comparing British understatement to an emotional volume knob on a stereo.
Oh, I like this analogy.
Yeah, because in many cultures, especially American or Southern European cultures, the volume knob goes from 1 to 10. If someone is furious or devastated or overjoyed, they turn the dial all the way up to 10 and they project that emotion outward. But the British understatement volume knob, especially in broadcast and professional settings, only goes up to a 4. The absolute trick for you, the listener, is understanding that when a British broadcaster turns the dial to 4, it actually represents an 11.
That is a remarkably helpful analogy, and it highlights a crucial insight that learners often miss. Understatement is not a sign of weakness.
No, not at all.
It's not an inability to feel deep emotion, nor is it a lack of vocabulary. Quite the opposite. It's a signal of immense composure and quiet confidence. It takes immense internal fortitude to experience an emotional 11 and have the discipline to express it as a 4. When you listen to the BBC, you must learn what we call dual-layer listening.
Dual-layer listening, I like that term.
Yeah, a trained listener hears the soft, polite, restrained words on the surface, but simultaneously feels the intense, roaring reality beneath them.
So we've established the cultural undercurrent of the stiff upper lip. But how does this philosophy manifest when the BBC isn't just interviewing explorers, but reporting on intense, high-stakes, highly controversial global news? Politics, wars, economic collapses. This leads us directly into the hidden grammar of journalism and the cross-cultural divide.
Yes. When you tune into BBC News, you are not just hearing standard English, you're hearing a highly specialized dialect. Journalism has its own distinct grammar, designed specifically to navigate controversy, protect sources, and maintain that crucial BBC-mandated tone of objective restraint.
Right.
The first major grammatical tool they rely on is journalistic framing, specifically regarding attribution.
Right, because BBC journalists almost never just come out and state a controversial fact as their own absolute opinion. They use a very specific phrase over and over again. Is understood to. For example, a political correspondent standing outside 10 Downing Street will say, "The Prime Minister is understood to be considering a resignation."
That phrase, "is understood to," carries immense hidden weight. When a BBC correspondent uses that exact phrasing, what they're really broadcasting to the trained ear is this: we at the BBC have multiple highly placed insider sources who have confirmed to us that this is absolutely true, but we are professionally and legally obligated to protect their identities, and we must maintain a veneer of journalistic distance until the official public announcement is made.
Wow, all that in 4 words.
Exactly. It's a structural way to project total confidence in a story without breaking the rules of formal attribution.
It's like a secret handshake with the audience. They are winking at you through the grammar. Now, another massive grammatical tool they use to maintain neutrality is the passive voice.
Oh yes, the dreaded passive voice. In standard writing classes, teachers constantly tell you to avoid the passive voice because it lacks energy. But in BBE journalism, the passive voice is a highly effective, deliberate political tool. Let's compare 2 sentences to see how it works.
Sure.
The active voice version would be, the government made several critical errors during the crisis. The passive voice version is, several critical errors were made during the crisis.
It's pure magic. The moment you use the passive voice, the blame literally evaporates into the air. Errors were made by whom? Nobody knows. The universe just spontaneously generated some errors. It removes the human agent from the sentence entirely.
Precisely. It allows the broadcaster to report truthfully on a massive failure or a catastrophe without directly accusing a specific individual or political party, which maintains the BBC's strict mandate of diplomatic neutrality. Recognizing when the passive voice is being deliberately deployed to avoid assigning blame is a vital, high-level critical listening skill.
And that desire to avoid direct, aggressive confrontation leads directly into what I like to call the euphemism economy.
The euphemism economy, I love that.
The BBC has this deep, incredibly rich well of polite phrases that they use to describe very unpleasant, ugly realities. For example, if a massive corporation is failing, hemorrhaging money, and on the brink of total bankruptcy, the BBC business reporter will rarely say they are failing. They might say the company is facing headwinds.
It is a lovely, almost poetic meteorological metaphor for complete financial ruin. You picture a ship bravely fighting the wind, rather than a corporation collapsing due to bad management.
Exactly. Or imagine a political summit where 2 leaders are in a room practically screaming at each other, throwing papers, absolutely furious. The BBC reporter will stand outside the closed doors, look solemnly at the camera and say, there was a robust exchange of views.
Robust is one of those fantastic dual-layer BBE words. When applied to a debate or a meeting, robust almost always means angry, heated, or borderline violent.
And then there is my absolute favorite euphemism in the history of the English language. The devastatingly polite, incredibly British way to call someone a liar on national television. Economical with the truth.
It is a brilliant construction, isn't it? It uses the dignified language of careful accounting and finance to describe deceit. If a politician is economical with the truth, they aren't necessarily telling a direct lie. Rather, they are rationing the truth.
Right, they're budgeting it.
Exactly. They are holding most of it back, being frugal with the facts. It's a severe, career-ending condemnation dressed up in a velvet suit.
This hidden grammar is endlessly fascinating to analyze, but we have to acknowledge that it creates a massive cross-cultural divide, especially in the global business world. This is a huge pain point for many of you listening right now who work in international environments, on Zoom calls with colleagues from London, New York, and Tokyo. The clash of communication styles can cause real professional damage.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's contrast the explicit, warm enthusiasm of American professional culture with the restrained, formal politeness of BBE.
The differences in a professional setting are incredibly stark. In standard American business culture, positive reinforcement is expected to be explicit, energetic, and highly visible.
Like a cheerleader.
Yes, essentially. If an employee pitches a good idea, they expect to hear, awesome, totally, great job, I love it. Conversely, if an idea is bad, an American manager might soften the blow slightly, but they will still be relatively direct. I'm not sure that works. Let's pivot and try this instead.
But in the UK, in a formal environment heavily influenced by BBE norms, that overt enthusiasm is heavily dialed down. You don't hear awesome. You hear a slow nod and an indeed, an I see, or a quite.
Let's analyze a highly specific, very common scenario to show how dangerous this divide can be. We'll call this the core idea dialogue. Imagine an ambitious American professional flies to London to pitch a bold new marketing strategy to a senior British manager.
Setting the scene.
The American goes through the slides full of energy. The British manager sits quietly, listens intently, nods slowly, and at the end says this: Yes, I thought it was quite an interesting approach. Some of the slides were perhaps a little dense. The core idea has some real possibilities.
Okay, let's look at this through the American lens. The American hears the words interesting approach and real possibilities. They completely filter out the hedging. They pack up their laptop thinking, home run, they loved it, I'm getting a promotion, they saw the possibilities.
But a British colleague sitting in that exact same room, listening to the exact same words, heard a completely different conversation. The British colleague knows the code.
The secret code.
Right. They know that quite an interesting approach, utilizing that downgrading quite we discussed earlier, combined with the critique a little dense, is actually a polite, firm, and final rejection. The manager was effectively saying, your presentation was confusing, the strategy is flawed, and we are not moving forward with this.
Let me push back on this on behalf of our listeners, because this is where frustration really boils over. If I'm the American in that room, I feel completely misled. Wait, are British people just constantly lying to each other? If the manager hates the presentation, why not just be honest and say this doesn't work, do it again? Dressing a rejection up as interesting possibilities feels deceptive, passive-aggressive, and incredibly inefficient.
It is entirely understandable why it feels that way from the outside looking in. It feels like a trap. But we must reframe how we view this. It is not lying, and it is not intended to be malicious.
Okay, then what is it?
It is a highly sophisticated, deeply ingrained social contract. Both parties in a native British environment understand the code perfectly. The manager knows she is rejecting the idea, and the British employee knows with absolute certainty that the idea is being rejected. The indirect language is specifically designed to preserve everyone's dignity.
Ah, saving face.
Exactly. It prevents the manager from having to be cruel, and it prevents the employee from losing face or feeling publicly humiliated in front of their peers. It's extreme politeness acting as a social lubricant to keep the workplace functioning smoothly without emotional outbursts.
Okay, that makes so much sense when you explain it as a mutual contract.
Yeah.
It's not a lie if everyone in the room has the decryption key and knows how to read the message. The problem is, if you, the language learner, don't have that decryption key, you end up walking face first into traps.
Exactly.
Which means we need to equip you right now. We've mapped the minefield of the BBC and British business culture. Now let's give you the practical strategies to navigate BBE in the wild. Let's look at the most common traps and pitfalls advanced learners fall into.
Let's review these so you can actively, consciously avoid them in your next listening session or meeting. First, as we discussed earlier, mishearing could have as could have because of that weak eve sound. You must train your brain to know that grammatically, could have simply does not exist. Whenever you hear that sound, mentally correct it to have.
Excellent. Second mistake. Interpreting British indirectness as agreement. This happens all the time. If you pitch an idea and a British person looks at you and says, I suppose, or that's an interesting perspective, massive red alarms should go off in your head.
Ding, ding, ding.
Right. Do not assume they agree with you. Those phrases are classic red flags, signaling polite, deeply held skepticism.
Third mistake, responding with a mismatch of energy. Specifically, bringing too much American-style enthusiasm into a formal British setting. If a colleague gives a routine, slightly dry update on a financial spreadsheet, and you throw your hands up and shout, oh my gosh, that is amazing, I absolutely love the way you formatted those cells, it will feel incredibly jarring to a British ear. It can come across as insincere, performative, or even a bit unhinged.
You absolutely need to match the emotional volume of the room. A calm, understated, excellent thank you, that spreadsheet is very helpful, going a much, much longer way in building trust.
And the fourth major pitfall, which trips up even the most advanced learners, taking rhetorical questions on the BBC literally.
Ooh, this is a tricky one. Paint the picture for us.
So a BBC political presenter might look directly at the camera at the end of a segment and ask, is it really any surprise that the policy failed so spectacularly? Now, if you are a learner and you're actively trying to answer that question in your head thinking, well, yes, actually, it is a surprise to me because the economic indicators were strong, you are missing the rhetorical function entirely.
Because they don't actually want an answer.
No, the presenter is not asking you for information. They're making a definitive, aggressive statement disguised as a polite question. They are asserting, unequivocally, it is absolutely no surprise at all.
It's a stylistic flourish.
Yeah.
It's syntax used as a weapon. Okay, so we know the sounds, we know the vocabulary, we know the culture, and we know the traps. Now, where do you go to actually practice all of this? We have curated a specific BBC listening menu for you, categorized by the exact skills they will help you develop. Let's walk through the courses.
Your first course, the Foundational Bedrock. BBC News at 6, or BBC News at 10. This is where you go to master formal vocabulary, those complex passive constructions, and the intricacies of journalistic attribution we discussed.
The formal stuff.
Yes. The newsreaders on these flagship programs deliver highly structured, meticulously edited, teleprompter-read prose. It's the clearest, most deliberate, and most formal version of BBE available.
Second course, BBC Radio 4. Specifically, the Morning Today program, or the absolute legendary interview show, Desert Island Discs.
Desert Island Discs is phenomenally useful for advanced learners. It's a long-form interview show where famous public figures discuss their lives, their regrets, and their triumphs through the lens of the music they would take to a desert island.
Why is it so vital for practice, though?
Because it's unscripted intimacy. You get to hear highly educated, formal BBE speakers hesitate. You hear them search for words, rephrase their thoughts in real time, and tell deeply personal stories. It teaches you the natural intellectual flow of the language when it isn't being read off a screen. You hear the vulnerability behind the stiff upper lip.
That's beautiful. Third course, BBC documentaries. Specifically, and I think we can all agree on this, anything narrated by the legendary Sir David Attenborough.
Oh, he is the absolute pinnacle of the craft. If you want a masterclass in descriptive language, deliberate pacing, and the pure, soaring musical intonation of the English language, listen to Attenborough describe a rare bird moving through a rainforest canopy.
It's mesmerizing.
It is. He uses dramatic, breathless pauses, he drops into hushed whispers, and he uses soaring vocal emphasis to build tension. It trains your ear to the extreme emotional range of BBE without ever losing that polished pronunciation.
And finally, the dessert course. The final boss of BBE comprehension, BBC panel shows. Shows like QI or Would I Lie to You?
I must warn the listeners, these are highly advanced.
Very advanced.
This is where you go to master dry, deadpan humor, incredibly fast overlapping speech, and deep, unspoken cultural references. The comedians and panelists speak at breakneck speed, they constantly interrupt each other, and they deliver layered, sarcastic jokes with perfectly straight faces. If you can follow an episode of a British panel show, keep up with the banter, and actually laugh at the jokes in real time, your BBE comprehension has reached an elite level.
It really is the ultimate test of dual-layer listening. If you can understand QI, you can understand any boardroom in London. Okay, we have covered so much ground today. From the physical, muscular phonetics of the glottal stop and the bath trap split, all the way to the philosophical, historical depth of the stiff upper lip and the social contract of understatement. To wrap up this massive deep dive, I want to set a practical homework assignment for you. We call it the 3-Listen Challenge.
It's a highly effective, rigorous method for active listening.
Here's what you need to do this week. Pick one BBC program from the menu we just gave you. Just pick one 5 to 10 minute segment. First, listen to it once all the way through, just for the rhythm. Do not pause it. Don't worry if you miss words. Let that river of sound wash over you. Feel the cadence. Listen to where the speaker places their stress.
Just absorb it.
Exactly. Then listen a second time actively. Pause it every time you hit a word you don't know. Look up the vocabulary. Find the hithertos, the incumbents, the pervasive. See how they are structured. Finally, listen a third time. But this time, don't listen for the definitions. Listen for the subtext. Listen for the understatement. Actively try to catch the exact moment the presenter or the interviewee turns the emotional volume knob to a polite 4 when you know the reality of the situation is a roaring 11.
It is a truly transformative exercise. And as you embark on this 3-Listen challenge, I want to leave you with a final, broader thought to ponder. We have spent all this time analyzing a very specific, historically rooted, highly refined communication style. But we must acknowledge that we live in a rapidly, aggressively globalizing world. The English language today is heavily, constantly influenced by the internet, by the sheer dominance of American pop culture, and by fast-paced, highly emotive social media platforms. So the provocative question is this. As global communication becomes increasingly direct, increasingly unfiltered, and emotionally explicit, will the historical stiff upper lip and the subtle, polite restraint of BBE eventually dissolve and fade into history? Or will this sophisticated, nuanced understatement become an even more valuable, specialized skill, a kind of elite linguistic currency for international diplomats, high-level negotiators, and global professionals who know exactly how to wield it to their advantage?
Wow. Does it fade away under the weight of the internet? Or does it become a rare superpower? That is a phenomenal question to mull over. I know which side of history I'm betting on. I think that level of restraint will always hold immense power in a noisy room. Before we go, remember how we started today. We talked about that overwhelming feeling of changing the channel to the BBC and suddenly feeling lost in the murky, fast-moving waters of a new accent. Well, hopefully those waters are a lot clearer to you now. You have the master key in your hand. You know the sounds, the structures, and the culture. Now you just have to use it. Remember, fluency is never a final destination. It is a daily habit. We are so thrilled to be part of your habit and your journey. Please take a moment right now to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel, Learn English Lab. We have so many more deep dives planned to help you elevate your English and understand the world behind the words. And right now, go down to the comments below and tell us, which BBC program from our menu are you going to start your 3-listen challenge with? Are you braving the news or jumping straight into a panel show? We cannot wait to read your answers and see what you choose. Keep listening, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.